Hello, my friends, how are you? Once you know the basic components of the interface, the first thing you should study when learning about a 3D software is the navigation controls of the three-dimensional environment. And the main navigation controls of the 3D environment are zoom, pan, and orbit. There are many ways to use these commands, but we will get right to the two most accessible and important, which are the 3D view navigation icons located here in the upper right corner of the 3D view, and the shortcuts. Let's start with the zoom. The zoom command is for zooming in and out of the scene elements. If we want to use the navigation icon, just click this magnifying glass icon, keep the button pressed, and drag up to zoom in and down to zoom out. The shortcut to the zoom is the mouse scroll. Just spin forwards to zoom in and backwards to zoom out. The pan command is for moving the screen sideways, up and down. To use this command through the icons, just click the hand icon here in the corner of the 3D view, keep the mouse button pressed and drag in the desired direction. And to pan using shortcuts, just hold down the Shift key and the middle mouse button and drag in the desired direction. And finally, we have the orbit command. This command is to rotate the 3D view so that we can see the 3D environment from other angles. To use the orbit through the icons, just click on this colorful icon and drag. Or simply hold down the middle mouse button and drag on the desired direction. In addition to being able to rotate using this navigation icon, we can click on each of these small colored circles to position the viewpoint precisely on the axis-specific views, such as top, right, front, and so on. And now, to finish, let's take a look at this button here. This button is used to toggle the 3D view between perspective mode and orthographic mode. The orthographic mode shows the 3D environment without the natural distortion we see in the real-world environment that makes objects appear smaller as they move away from the viewer. And although this view is unnatural and may seem a bit odd, it can be quite useful in some steps of the work. Now that we have started to see the first Blender shortcuts, it is important that you pay close attention to how it works. All Blender shortcuts are sensitive to the editor the cursor is on. This means that the shortcut will only work if you have the cursor over the editor you want to use the shortcut. For example, we just saw the navigation shortcuts. We saw that if we have the cursor over the 3D view, we can rotate the mouse scroll to zoom in and out of the scene. However, if we place the cursor over the timeline and spin the scroll, we will see that the zoom will be given in the timeline itself, not in the 3D view. And if we hover over the Properties editor and scroll, we will see that nothing will happen, because right now there is nothing to scroll here. So, whenever you use a shortcut, be careful so that the cursor is over the editor you want the shortcut to work, okay? For you to be able to do any work on a 3D software, it's crucial to know how to comfortably navigate the 3D environment. In this lesson, we will see how to select and transform objects. And to do that, we can use the default Blender scene. By now, you may have noticed that when you open Blender or create a new file by going to File, New, General, Blender creates a scene that comes with these three objects. In the center, we see a cube, which is a geometry. In addition, we have this point, which is a light, and this pyramid-shaped object, that is a camera. And since the default scene comes with these initial objects, we can use it to see how to select and transform objects. If we look here on the left side of the 3D view, we will see this bar with some buttons. This is the 3D view toolbar. And although the icons are very intuitive and easy to identify, if you want, you can position the cursor on the right edge of it, and when the cursor takes on this format, you can click and drag to the right. When you do that, at first you will see that the buttons are organized into two columns. And if you drag further, you will see now that the buttons now display the two names next to the icons. As I said before, these icons are easy to identify. But when we are learning how to use the software, it may be a good idea to make the names visible to make them easier to identify. As we can see here, the first button is called Select Box. If we leave this button pressed, we can see that there are other selection tool options. But the selection box will be enough for everything we will need to do on this course. When this tool is active, we can click on any object to select it, or click and drag to create a selection window to select everything within it. If we click anywhere empty of the 3D view, we will deselect everything that is selected. And if we want to select more than one object, just select the first, and then, while holding down the Shift key, click on the object we want to add to the selection. Also, a quick way to clear the selection is by using the Alt-A shortcut. And a quick way to select everything is simply to press the A key. And lastly, another quick and efficient way to select objects is simply to click on the object name here in the outliner. Now, let's take a look at how to transform the objects in the scene. And by transform, I mean moving, rotating, and scaling the objects. And to perform these operations, we will use these tools here from the toolbar. Let's start with the Move tool. When we have one of these tools active, we can also select the objects by simply clicking on them. And when we select one or more objects, we will see that a colored icon appears in the 3D view. This icon can be called Transform Gizmo or Manipulator. The Move tool manipulator consists of these three arrows and these three squares. Each of these arrows correspond to one of the axes of the three-dimensional environment. The red arrow corresponds to the x-axis, the green arrow corresponds to the y-axis, and the blue arrow corresponds to the z-axis. If we click on any of these arrows and drag, the object will be moved only on the axis in question. So, if I click and drag on the red arrow, I move the object only on the x-axis. clicking and dragging on the green arrow moves the object only on the y-axis, and if I click the blue arrow, I move the object only on the z-axis. These squares that exist between the arrows allow us to move the object in only two axes, excluding the axis of the corresponding color. So, if I click on this blue square, the tool excludes the z-axis and moves the object only on the x and y-axis. If I click on this green square, I move the object only on the x and z-axis. And if I click this red square, I move the object along the z and y-axis. And if I have the Move tool active and click and drag anywhere empty on the screen, I move the object perpendicular to the screen. Now, let's take a look at the Rotate tool. When the Rotate tool is active, we can see these 4 arcs over the selected object. This is the rotation manipulator. Each arc also corresponds to an axis of the three-dimensional environment. And if we click and drag on one of them, we rotate the object only on that axis. That is, if I click and drag on the red axis, I rotate the object only on the x-axis. If I click and drag on the green axis, I rotate the object only on the y-axis. And if I click and drag on the blue axis, I rotate the object only on the z-axis. And if I click and drag on this white arc or rotate outside it, I rotate the object perpendicular to the screen. And finally, if I click and drag inside that arc without clicking on any of the other arcs, I rotate the object freely, as if clicking and dragging a ball. Now, before using the Scale tool, I will use the Ctrl-Z shortcut to go back a few steps until the box returns to the starting position. By default, Blender is set up to save up to 32 steps in history. Which means if we use Ctrl-Z, we can go back up to 32 commands. Now let's take a look at the Scale tool. The Scale manipulation icon is very similar to the Move tool manipulation icon. We have these edges to scale the objects one axis at a time, we have these squares to scale the objects in 2 axes at a time, and if we click anywhere else, we scale the objects on the 3 axes at the same time. And finally, we have the Transform tool. This tool is nothing more than all the other ones mixed. When this tool is active, we see all manipulators at the same time. So we can move, rotate, and scale the objects using just one tool. This can be a bit confusing in some situations, but it can also be quite versatile. Finally, I will activate the Select Box tool once again to show how we can use the transform commands using some basic shortcuts. So, even though I don't have any transform tools active, I can move the selected object by pressing the G key for grab, I can rotate the object using the R key for rotate, and I can scale the object by using the S key for scale. And these were the main selection and transformation commands.